And we're kind of the overall theme of this week is grounding and centering. And one of the really important ways to do that is to have a more mobile, more flexible, more, elastic pelvic floor. Rigidity and tension in the pelvic floor will make your steps feel cement-like, feel wooden, and will cause a host of energetic blockages that can make you feel foggy-headed, that can cause you to clench your jaw when you're sleeping or hold your shoulders up around your ears. So we're going to work a little bit. I know we did a pelvic floor class a few weeks ago, but I'm back at that again. And we're going to work a little bit on some unusual movements, movements that you do know, but from a different perspective, and trying to kind of bring some more trampoline-like movement to the pelvic floor. It is the floor of your core. So it really relates to Core Wednesdays. We're going to start seated. As you can see, I've got a chair. I would highly suggest that you use a chair for different parts of today's class. If you don't have a fold-in chair or kitchen chair like mine, then you can just come down onto the ground, but maybe fold your blanket quite thickly so you have lots of good support underneath your sitting bones, because that's where we're really going to be kind of working at the beginning of this, is on our sitting bones. So let me get up on my chair. We'll also be using a foam block at one point today. And I don't have a foam block in my home studio here. I'm really cheap, I guess. I don't buy all the props. I just use what I've gleaned for free mostly. But I'm going to use a full roll of toilet paper. I always joke around about using it, and today I'm actually going to do it. So I'm seated in an upright position. So with the chair, you could call this seated mountain pose. If you're seated on the floor, just come into a comfortable cross-legged sit. Do try to make sure you're using enough props so that your hips are a little bit higher than your knees. I'm short, so that happens naturally when I sit in a chair. If you have longer bones, you may need to have some padding underneath your seat, even in a chair, in order to achieve that higher hip joint to knee joint. Okay. And Otis, some of your work from the 40-month project is going to come out. I hope that's okay. Okay. Let me just try. Yeah, there we go. Sorry about that. So seated on the chair, you might want to just kind of wiggle from side to side like I am. Just a little bit of side to side wiggle to expose the sitting bones. Now, everyone knows what I'm talking about when I'm talking about sitting bones. These are the bones that you feel protruding right now down into the floor. When you ride your bike, you get sore sitting bones. When you sit on cold cement, you get cold sitting bones. Okay, good. The technical name is ischial tuberosity, but we don't have to worry too much about that. So then now we're going to start to kind of do a little bit of forward and back across the sitting bones. So roll forward on your sitting bones and roll back on your sitting bones. I'm going to turn my chair sideways so you can see this a bit better. You're fine right where you are. But notice how I have lots of space behind my back, and I'm rolling forward on the sitting bones and back on the sitting bones. My head is staying upright. I'm facing straight ahead. I'm not trying to do a lot of movement around the rib cage or the shoulders. I'm just rolling forward and back, as if my sitting bones were the rungs of a rocking chair, and I'm doing a nice, slow, relaxing rock forward and back. We'll just do that maybe a little bit more. Notice how you're breathing when you're doing this. Are you holding your breath? Is there a rhythm to your breath? And have you automatically timed your breath with this movement? Okay. And then I'm going to turn my chair on. I just have to show you something really quick. I'm just going to move my computer. Can you see my dog? Can you see her in there? She's hidden in all of the blankets. She's nested herself right in there. She loves our yoga time. Okay, back to work. Sorry. Cute cat video inserted itself into class today. Okay, so now we're going to see about keeping our awareness in the sitting bones, upright posture, roll to one side, then roll forward, then roll to the other side and roll back on the sitting bones. I shouldn't have spoke. She got restless and she's wandering around now. So you notice I'm doing kind of a circular movement right across the surface of the pelvic floor. Take your time with this. There's no rush. This is probably the most important stuff we'll do. Notice the upper body really isn't moving that much. It's more a movement across and around the pelvic floor. Let's change direction of the circles. So in the pelvic floor, you've got some slings of muscle and connective tissue that support each other. And there's a front triangle and there's a back triangle to the pelvic floor. This movement is kind of starting to kind of massage around both sides, the anterior and the posterior triangles. So it works with our vagina, it works with our urethra, and it works with the anus. So all of the different parts of our bits that need a little bit of circulation, a little bit of loosening up. Okay, from here, I'm going to come down onto the ground, onto my knees. Let me show an alternative if being on your knees isn't comfortable. Sorry, Natalie, I'm going to need my space now. So this is Thunderbolt Pose. This is a suggestion of what you could do. If this isn't comfortable, take your feet out front and place them like this. And this might be a little bit more comfortable for you. So I'm going to go back to my Thunderbolt Pose. Notice the position of the sitting bones, how it changes quite organically when you come to a different seated position. And then let's take a little bit of that same sort of movement. Roll forward on the sitting bones and roll back on the sitting bones. Forward and back. So it's the same movement you did seated, but now you're in a different leg position. What's different? What's changed? What if you start going to the circles? And you don't have to go to a really extreme range of motion here. In fact, to dial it back to more about 70%, 60% effort is probably more effective. Let's reverse the direction of your circles. And then come to stillness. My next suggestion is to come down onto the belly. You'll notice the way my blanket is folded, it's going to give me a little bit of cushioning for the frontal bones here. I often call them the bumper bones. If you're not on carpet, you might find that helpful. If being on the ground on your belly is uncomfortable, we are going to go to side lying next. So you can just either rest and seated for a moment, lie down, or come with us into prone, because we're going to stay down here for a little bit longer. So coming to a prone position, you can use your hands under your forehead just to kind of make sure you can still breathe here. And then making the same sort of movements from the prone position that you did when you were seated. So you have to kind of imagine the contact on the sitting bones now. But when you roll forward on the sitting bones, you'll notice that your belly presses a little bit more into the floor. And when you roll backwards on the sitting bone, you'll notice that your hips press more into the floor. So upper belly as you roll forward, more like the hip points or the bumper bones as you roll backwards on the sitting bones. So just notice a lot of the muscle engagement that happens when you do this movement and see if you can dial that back. So sometimes the butt muscles want to get involved, or you want to clench your belly. Can you dial back the movement so it's more subtle and there isn't quite so much muscular engagement around other places in the body? And again, what's going on with your breath? What is it that you want to breathe like? Is it rhythmic? Are you holding your breath? Okay. Let's let all that movement go. You might want a couple circles. That can be a really interesting way to release tension from low back and around the sitting bone area. And then let's roll over onto our side. So our bottom leg can be straight-ish, top leg a little bit bent. And we're going to take our hands, a little bit of time for touching now. If you need a pillow underneath your head, that's fine. I'm just going to substitute with my arm briefly. But if your arm doesn't like this position, then you can have a pillow underneath. Take your hand and see if you can reach back and find your sitting bone. It might be fairly exposed in this position. And then just kind of notice when you shift your leg forward and shift your leg back, do you feel any movement in your sitting bone? So what's your sitting bone doing? Keep this movement relaxed and soft. Because what we're really trying to do is we're trying to bring that elasticity, we're trying to bring that receptivity into the area of the pelvic floor. And a lot of the muscles of the pelvic floor do attach through the sitting bones. And a lot of the, we'll call them accessory muscles for the pelvic floor, has something to do with the sitting bones as well. So if the sitting bones float around and move easily, then our pelvic floor is more likely to have movement available to it. Now notice how you're breathing. Are you instinctively breathing, inhaling one way and exhaling another way? What makes sense to you? Notice your jaw, your facial muscles. Are you clenching anywhere there? Okay. Let's let that relax. And then we'll roll over to the other side. So you just roll right over. I'm going to flip over this way just so I can still see you. And of course, if lying on your side is uncomfortable, this can also be done from seated in the chair. And let me just briefly demonstrate what that would look like. I think you can see over here. You would just kind of sit so one butt cheek was off the chair, move the leg, and observe the movement of the sitting bone as you kind of imitate the same range of motion, but you're supported by the chair. So know that if being on the ground is uncomfortable, that's okay. We can modify and use the chair. Okay, so got the same sort of thing happening as we did on the other side. This might feel all different though, because your body is different on the right side and on the left side. So what's going on with your sitting bone? See if you can tune in. For a lot of us, this is like the inner workings are just like one big mystery. And we wait for other people to come along and tell us if we're okay or not. So the purpose of my classes for me is to try to help us empower ourselves so that we can kind of figure out what's going on and try to find healthier patterns of movement on our own with our own organic intelligence, because we all have it. It's there for you to use. And notice how you're breathing. And notice the tension in places like your jaw and what other places you habitually hold. And then we'll let that go. Let's roll over onto our backs. Just going to adjust my blanket a little bit so that I have comfort the length of my spine. Have your foam block or your roll of toilet paper not too far away. We'll use it in a little while. And we'll come over onto our backs. Takes a moment to settle. Make sure your feet aren't too close into your body, because you want to make sure that your whole hip area, your whole low back area feels like it has some space. Because we're trying to relax the habitually held tension in the pelvic area so it becomes more fluid and trampoline-like. So we're going to take some time now to observe our breath. Really kind of feeling into the area of the pelvic floor. And this is where I'm going to borrow from some of Otis' work. It's a really lovely bit of imagery to help us really try to find some more movement in the pelvic floor by using our breath. So we've all blown up a lot of balloons in our day for birthday parties and such. Can you imagine an upside down balloon? So the neck of the balloon is up here and the main part of the balloon is in my belly. And as you inhale, allow the balloon to fill and gently spread the sitting bones. And as you exhale, the balloon naturally deflates and the sitting bones come back together. So on the inhale, there's a widening of the sitting bones, but also a three-dimensional sense to the spaciousness being created in the pelvic bowl. Because it's not just the sitting bones widening here, it's actually all the bones parting and allowing a little bit of spaciousness for the expansion of the breath. Close your eyes if that helps. As you take a couple just slow, very mindful breaths with this balloon imagery, if that helps, in your belly. Remember, the balloon blows up in all directions. So there's a three-dimensionality to this. Your hip bones are widening, and your pubis bone is parting just a little bit in the center there. Your tailbone's getting out of the way. Everything is expanding, and it's very, very subtle. It happens absolutely automatically. You don't have to think about it or guide it. But today we're really making a bit of a practice of that. Now, may I suggest that you take your hands and see if it's possible to find your bumper bones. So these are the protruding bones. The technical name is your anterior superior iliac spine, but that's too long to say, so I like bumper bones. And just kind of notice your bumper bones. I'm feeling a nice light massage is in order here because it just feels calming to me. So if that helps for you, then of course. And then gently cup with your fingers your bumper bones and go back to the balloon imagery. As you inhale and the balloon expands in the lower belly, see if you can gently, just ever so gently guide the bones apart. And then as you exhale and the balloon deflates, guide the hip bones a little closer together. Now I'm not pushing. This is an energetic, almost like somebody was doing a woo over my belly, just a little opening on the inhale and a little energetic gathering on the exhale. The tiniest bit of encouragement from a little massage can really help you get that tactile sense or that visceral sense of what happens in the lower belly as you breathe in and it expands and you breathe out and it gathers back in. Now, as you do that, if you are using your hands like I am, what do you feel happening in the pelvic floor? Is there any sense of energy moving there or an awareness gathering, an aliveness even? And that's amazing. That's awesome if that happens, because that means those muscles and all the connective tissue are getting the message. As we get older, we have issues like incontinence and other dysfunctions of the pelvic floor that become very obvious. But all of those things started decades before we reached for the depends. So this is wonderful that you're having a lot of activity in the pelvic floor based on your breathing pattern. Taking one or two more breaths. And then we're going to move on to some other explorations. So I'm hoping that you have a sense of a little bit more energy in your pelvic floor. I'm going to roll over, press up, and come into table pose. Let me just show something that we could try today. A number of the poses are on hands and knees now. And if that's not going to work for you, let's get a hold of our trusty chair. Bring it to the wall, but you see it's a little bit different than we normally sit in it. And come to table pose, back just a little bit, like this. And then follow along with the cues, just with your hands on the wall, feet on the floor, and creating table pose this way. So let me move my mat so I can see you a little bit better. So we're coming to hands and knees. I'm going to adjust my blanket so it's underneath my knees. And find a nice spacious table pose. So something where you're not jammed up, you're not too tight. And it's okay if you're not perfectly aligned, you know, hips over knees and arms over wrists. It's okay. I want lots of space today, lots of softness. And then when you're ready, extend the spine. You know this movement, but stay here and continue to breathe in a normal, relaxed way. So just to visit with this for a little bit, the pelvic floor is really the star of the show today. So I'm thinking about those sitting bones, and those sitting bones are in that rolled forward position. And I'm really extending the sitting bones back behind me. It's kind of like trying to shoot fireworks out of my sitting bones. I really want to extend them backwards. The belly is gathered. I'm not dumping the belly to the ground. The belly is providing a little bit of a hammock or a sling for all the internal organs. So just take one more breath here. Notice how unusual it is to hold this in position perhaps. And then do the opposite position. We know this is cat stretching yoga. So now we've rolled backwards over the sitting bones, and the sitting bones will be a little bit closer in proximity to each other. And of course, we've got a stretch happening in the lower back. Try taking a couple breaths holding this pose and just noticing any movement or any energy you can sense in the pelvic floor. And then go ahead and just kind of move now with your breath. Notice when you want to inhale, when you want to exhale. It doesn't mean you have to do it the way we always do it. Maybe this is the exhale for you today, and this is the inhale for you today. If that doesn't seem to make much sense, go back to the way we usually do it, and maybe now you have a reason to do it the traditional way. When you really watch the actions of the pelvis, the actions of the pelvic floor, the sitting bones, the bumper bones, and just float through that once or twice more. So if you're doing table pose the way I demonstrated on the chair, it's exactly the same, back and forth. And then we're going to take a bit of a whale tail here. So you can also do this on the chair by bringing your knees closer together and stepping your feet further apart. So my knees are knocking and my feet are far apart. Now let's try our movement again. Rolling over the sitting bones, just like we did initially from seated, but with our legs in internal rotation. And what does that feel like? As best as you can, keep awareness in the pelvic floor and keep curious. What's the balloon doing in this side of the movement when my spine is extended? And what's the balloon doing when I'm in this movement, the cat back movement? Now let's take it differently. Let's take the big toes together and the knees wide apart. And again, we can do this if you're seated in the chair. Step your feet together and let your knees splay apart. And then try the movement again. Where does it make sense to you to inhale? And where does it make sense to exhale? Do you feel, and maybe not yet, but do you feel that there's any more mobility in the sitting bones? Does it seem like they're bouncing around or fluidly moving a little bit more than when we first started? Because that's kind of our hope anyway. And then for my friends that are here on the ground, just push back maybe into a very wide knee child's pose. For my friends on the chair, keep your knees apart and maybe let yourself fold forward in between your legs. It doesn't need to be a really deep forward fold. You can brace on your arms if you don't want to go into the full forward fold. And as I said, I was planning to spend some time on knees to do a few things. What we're doing now can still be done from the chair. So stay in the chair if you don't want to get onto your knees. Let's come back into our original table pose position, our very spacious table pose. And let's take one leg and take it out to the side. So if you're seated in your chair, just take your leg and stretch it out to the side. You might have to shift forward in your chair seat a little bit, and you keep one hand on the wall still. Or both hands on the wall at this point. Let's go into a little bit of that same mobilization that we've been doing from so many different positions. So start by just shifting forward a little bit, leaning towards the wall a little bit if you're seated, and then pushing back a little bit. Back leans back to the chair back if you're seated. So just a little bit of forward and back. Notice the pelvic floor. So we keep coming home to that concept of how does the movement of the body affect the movement of the tissues of the pelvic floor. And sometimes by having the bony landmarks of the sitting bones and the bumper bones, we can kind of guess what's going on. There we go. Now, what if we added a little bit of kind of that cat-cow sort of movement? So rounding out as we pull back, and then a little bit of lifting of the sitting bones as we pull forward. So we're combining the rocking with a cat-cow type movement. And how does that feel? And notice your breath. What makes sense? All right, come back to a central position. Our leg is still outstretched. Leave one arm on the wall or the floor. Whatever leg you have outstretched, take that arm and let's inhale and lift it up. Rotate our chest. As you exhale, rotate the chest the other way, sliding the arm underneath the other arm. And let's flow back and forth with our breath. So we start out, we're inhaling this way and we're exhaling this way. Now I'll just come to my chair briefly in case anybody's not sure what's going on with this movement here. This is how it would look if I were doing it with the chair. So this is interesting. What if we change the breath? So next time you have your arm threaded underneath, stay there and inhale here. And then as you exhale, open out to the side. So inhaling as you come down and exhaling as you go open. I wonder how that feels now. Does that make a difference to the pelvic floor at all? And then let's come back to our leg out, both hands on the ground briefly. And then we can lift up off the ground or take your hands from the wall to the sides of the hips. We're getting ready to flow a little bit in gate pose here. So I've got my right leg extended out to the side. I'm going to flip so you can see a little bit better. You're fine the way you are. I'm going to use the opposite arm for this. Now, holding your arm up is just not going to work today. Know that it's quite possible to practice all of this with the hand on the hip. Inhale. And exhale, lean out over towards your extended leg. And let's move back and forth a couple times in what we know as gate pose in yoga. Again, really being observant of the effect this is having on the sitting bones. And again, like we're just trying a whole bunch of different stuff today. I don't know which key will unlock whatever's locked in our pelvic floor. What if we stayed here, exhaled here, and then inhaled to come into gate pose? Does that feel different? Does that do anything? Inhaling as we lean over, which is kind of the opposite that we would normally do. Okay. Now for my friends in the chair, we're going to stay with the leg outstretched right where you are. For us on the ground, can we drop our little tushies back down onto the floor? One leg outstretched. We're going to do a little flow just to kind of complete this series. And I'll show you that there's lots of different options here. So I've got my right leg outstretched. I'm going to work with my right arm initially. I'm going to inhale, lift up the right arm, point the right toes. And then as I exhale, I'm going to sweep around and lean towards the extended leg. Now you could exaggerate this a little bit more by going into kind of a wild thing sort of idea. but it's really not anything you have to force yourself into. My friends that are using the chair option today, this is what it could look like. So we're doing the same kind of arm motion, but our weight is mostly being borne by the chair, so we don't have to have any weight on our seat. Let's take one more breath, flowing this way. And then let's bring ourselves right back over into the table position. We're going to take that leg extended series out to the other side. I'm going to flip around so I can see you a little bit better. So we're going to take one leg out to the side, the opposite leg now. And you remember there's always the chair if your knees are getting tired of all this crazy stuff today. If your hip joint is where the issue is, bring your leg back a little bit. Don't bring it so far forward, and that might help a little bit. And from here, we'll start that gentle chug forward and chug back. Make the movement very subtle. Notice the effect on the sitting bone. Now it's my left leg that's outstretched now. So I want, if I can, to really tune into the movement of the whole left hip. The whole left hip bone. So the sitting bone's attached to the hip bone. And when the sitting bones moves, it kind of has an effect on the whole hip bone. Not the joint per se, but the whole bone shifts. And then after I've kind of sensed into the hip and the sitting bone on the side that's working now, let's add our little cat-cow kind of movement. So we've combined a chugging forward and back with an extension and flexion of the spine, especially the lower spine. So what's going on in your sitting bones now? What's going on in your bumper bones now? Can you imagine as you go through these unusual movements this afternoon that your pelvic floor is being flushed with new circulation? Lots of layers of tissue are being lubricated as they slide and glide over each other. But also all of this attention, because you know where your thoughts go, prana flows, all of this attention is bringing lots of life force energy to an area in the body that works so hard for you. After you've explored the cat-cow a little bit, then we're going to start to move towards the thread the needle movement. So I'm going to lift up the same leg as I have arm. I'm going to inhale, lift up. Exhale, softly wind underneath. The object is not here to get your shoulder all the way to the ground or, you know, to be able to lift something else up and bind or any of the sexy things we can sometimes do in yoga. The objective here is to stay focused on the pelvic floor and really feel the effect that this rotation has on the tissues of the pelvic floor. What are the bony landmarks doing, like the sitting bones? And then after you've done this way for a little while, hold here while you inhale. And then exhale, open up. So you're flipping the breath. As we take our movements and we do the exact opposite of what we're used to doing, we're going to get some different results. If you always do the same thing the same way, you're always going to get the same result. So let's try things different. Let's be creative and curious and interested. Wonderful. And then once we've played with that quite a bit, what if we go over to the other side, move the other arm? So inhale, open up. Exhale, thread underneath. And we'll try that movement for a few breaths. And notice if you can discern any changes in the pelvic floor, anything that's different, moving this arm instead of the other one. And then, of course, we can flip the breath too. So staying here for the inhale, and then exhale, open up. Good. Okay. And then we're going to get ready to add in our gate pose to this series. So remember, you can be doing this in the chair as well if you don't want to weight bear on the knee. You can also have a hand on the hip if holding your arm up is uncomfortable. Inhale and exhale. Do you sense how the two halves of your pelvis do different things? You have this big lever of an arm and shoulder up here pulling on the hip bone, and it's lifting it, which is going to pull the sitting bones apart. But what if we flip the breath? Stay here as you exhale, as you inhale, exhale, and then inhale on the movement. So that's different. And then exhale to come back up. Does that make you feel more stable or less stable? What other kinds of things come up? Because, you know, in yoga, we talk about having a multi-layered experience. So it's not just the physical movements that are interesting, not even just the breath that's interesting, but it's our ideas and our opinions and our moods that are affected by all of this work. Now, my friends that are in the chair, stay right where you are. Those of us that can plop right back down to the ground, and we'll come into the flow just to finish out this part of the series. So when you're ready, same arm as leg. Inhale, stretch up as best you can, and then exhale, fold towards the leg. So as always, if lifting your arm is uncomfortable, hand can stay down. You don't have to lift the arm up. And you may actually find you get even more movement in the pelvic floor without going too deep into the movement, because some of our habits of stretching aggressively in yoga can create armoring, actually make us less flexible in the long run. Let's just take one more breath. Maybe this is what you've chosen to do today. It's a very personal decision. And then let's come back over to our child's pose. So we were using a wide-legged child's pose today. If that's not your jam, you discovered you don't like it, then you don't have to have your knees wide apart. If you're in the chair, you could modify this by just widening the knees and folding forward in between your legs. And you don't have to drop your head too low if that leaves you dizzy or anything. Just a little chance to stretch out your back. Let's just take a break. Whatever posture you have chosen in this moment, I hope it's a comfortable one for you, because I'd like to just notice your overall experience at this point in class. So just noticing your breath. Tension in the jaw, shoulders, buttocks. Are we continuing along that process of bringing more awareness and aliveness, flexibility, a trampoline-like quality to the pelvic floor? Do you feel like you can feel that balloon in any more intimacy now? Okay, let's move up to a standing position. So I'm going to get rid of my blankets. And I don't have a foam block, so I'm going to use my roll of toilet paper. I'm going to come a little closer so you can see this motion a little bit better. So I'm standing in mountain pose with the block between the thighs, or whatever prop you can come up with. And I want to bring awareness to the toes as we begin this. So really wiggling the toes, massaging the toes into the ground. Good. Really kind of spreading your toes. And then after a little bit of exercise, relax your toes. So relax your toes as much as you can on purpose. There's a lot of connection, believe it or not, to what happens in our toes and what happens in the pelvic floor. So when I went to get some expert help about the pelvic floor, I thought about all those years in high heels for hours and hours. And I thought how damaging that was to the natural function of my pelvic floor. So us yogis spending time barefoot with lots of mobility in the toes, thank goodness. So the block is just here to give you a sense of grounding in the legs. So you're not gripping the block. You're not trying to expel it out the back. You're not trying to internally rotate your thighs or any other things I might have talked about in other classes. You want to just gently feel the block in between your thighs so you have a real sense of how to hold, how to be connected to the earth. So relaxed toes, firm awareness in the legs. So they're alive and awake. Now, it might help you to take your hands in front of you. I'm not actually touching my body. I'm just going to do a little bit of movement with my hands, my Hawaiian dance impersonation. You may have heard the diaphragm described like a jellyfish. So I'm going to try to imitate a jellyfish with my hands. So let's take an exhale together and then just kind of feel the diaphragm retracting up. And as you inhale the diaphragm, like that balloon we talked about. And then just with not what I'm doing, but what you're doing, what you're feeling, even close your eyes, move the hands in time with your own breath. Because I'm talking, so I'm really not doing the practice. I'm really not getting the benefits, but you can by really feeling the hands and seeing the hands in front of you as an imitation of this jellyfish-like movement, really nice and soft. So as you're breathing and being aware of the movement of the diaphragm, think about the pelvic diaphragm, because the pelvic floor is a secondary diaphragm. It's doing the same sort of movement. Can you create this bounciness, this fluidity, this ease as you breathe out and in? Just staying with that. If your arms are getting tired, relax them, but see if you can keep that internal focus of that nice, smooth, floaty feeling in the middle of your body. I'm going to turn sideways. You're fine right where you are. We're going to add a little bit more movement. We're going to use strength in the legs, keep softness in the toes. You can keep the hands going if you find that that's really interesting. So we're going to take an inhale and an exhale. As you inhale, push the hips back into a very gentle chair pose. And then exhale, stand back up. Inhale, booty moves back in a very gentle chair pose. And then exhale, lift up. So our body movement right now is echoing the flow of energy in the body and helping us to understand how we would like the pelvic floor to be moving. So if I'm doing this too long, you take a break, come back when you can. Keep the toes soft so they're not weight bearing, they're not gripping into the floor. And just kind of really be as fluid and gentle. So if chair pose is the pose that you really don't like in yoga, this is not the time to push yourself to learn a deeper version. Make this a little tiny bend, a little gentle little chair pose so that you can be really fluid and really comfortable and soft. Taking a couple more breaths with that. Good. And then we'll let go of our prop. Thank you, roll of toilet paper. And we'll take our feet a little bit wider apart. Now, if your toes want to turn out a little bit, that's fine. It's natural for most of us females anyway, to want to turn out our toes a little bit as we widen the feet. And we're going to, again, lift the toes, exercise the toes, roll around on the feet, and then relax. Then deliberately on purpose, relax all the musculature and the connective tissue of the feet. Keeping weight on the full ball of the foot and all around the heel, but don't grip with your toes. We're going to come into a little bit of squat here. So it's a wide-legged sort of chair pose. And if you want to, you can kind of add the hands again to kind of help your body remember that the balloon opens on the inhale and contracts and lifts on the exhale. So you can take your feet a little bit wider, you can take your feet a little bit closer. There's no science to this, it's how you feel. I'm sensing a little wider. I feel like doing a little wider now. How about you? Like what would make you feel as though you have more space to really feel this? Well, this pose is called Devyasana, which is kind of like goddess pose. So I guess there's a lot of fertility woven into this ancient history of this pose. But for us, we really want to bring that energy to the pelvic floor. We want to bring that vibrancy, that circulation, that fluidity and flexibility. One or two more breaths. And then I just have one more thing to do standing, and then we're going to move to the floor for a few closing postures. So come back to your mountain pose. stand as you normally would stand, you know, waiting in line for something. And be aware, if you can, the energy coming up through the floor, through the feet, the legs, and up into the whole pelvic bowl. So when this part of our body is more fluid and jelly-like and jellyfish-like and can move when we breathe, and we know what's happening down there now, we're really getting the map in the brain more clear. Now we have energy. Now we feel like we could jump and bounce around. And I'm not going to ask you to do any skipping this afternoon, although you might want to try some later. I am going to ask you, though, to play around a little bit. So if you have a chair like this, it can just help with a little bit of confidence, but you don't need a chair like that. I'm going to ask you to come more to the middle of your mat so you have room before you and above you. And it doesn't matter which leg you start with, but remember that little mini chair pose we were doing, kind of keep that energy going. And then when you're ready, we're going to take an inhale, come into that mini chair pose, lift the leg, shoot it back. And then as you exhale, bring the knee up. And then as you inhale, shoot the chair pose back. And as you exhale, bring the energy up. So you can always hold on to the chair if you're just not sure about your balance today, or you can freeform it. So this is the cool thing about the pelvic floor work, is that when it's really elastic and really mobilized, you have better balance, and you might be sensing that. Try a couple more breaths here. And I'm just kind of doing whatever my body kind of thinks about doing. Not really worrying about if it's perfect. And then I'm going to come back to mountain pose, reset. And then think about the other leg. So start by lifting and spreading the toes and then relaxing them on purpose, making sure that your legs are alive. And then you come into that mini chair pose, and the other leg inhales out and exhale, energy lifts up. Remember, you can have a hand or two hands on the chair in front of you if balance isn't really working, but you may be today pleasantly surprised with what is coming, because everything's been so softened in the hips and the pelvic girdle. The pelvic floor is more alive, and it's sending much more detailed information up to your brain about where you are in space and time. It's not a fuzzy nether region anymore. You have a really clear map developing of it, and now you have more ability to move. Brilliant. Come back to one last mountain pose. Relax on purpose. And without using your hands, maybe your eyes are even closed, can you feel the jellyfish-like movement in the pelvic floor and in the main thoracic diaphragm? And if you don't really feel it, fake it till you make it. Imagine it, because it will happen more easily when you are focused on it. Okay, let's come down onto the floor for a couple closing stretches. You may find it helpful to have your yoga strap, an old tie or length of scarf, anything that might help, just in case our arms aren't quite long enough. So we'll come back to this position on our backs. We were here earlier in the class. A lot's changed since then, though. And if possible, bring one leg closer into your body and take a hold of the edge of the foot with your hand. If you can't reach without, really straining to get up off the mat, that's where a strap can be really helpful. Lift the bottom of the foot up so it makes a shelf facing the ceiling, and your knee is heading down towards the ground, almost as though you're going to try to tuck it into your armpit. So we're doing a half happy baby here. And I'm deliberately taking it easy with this, because I want to be able to have enough mental energy and enough physical stamina to go back down to thinking about in the pelvic floor while I hold this position.
So let's maybe bring the balloon imagery back. As you inhale, the balloon is expanding down into the low belly. And as you exhale, the balloon is deflating. So as you inhale, the sitting bones are coming apart. And as you exhale, the sitting bones are closing closer together. And now we know the sitting bones are attached to the bumper bones. So as you inhale, the balloon expands in all directions, pushing the bumper bones further apart. And as you exhale, the bumper bones gather closer as the balloon deflates. Can you hold here for a couple more breaths? Maybe the imagery is helping. And then we can release feet back to the floor. Maybe do a quick little mini Shavasana. Just kind of notice, I was working with this leg and this whole side, leg, buttocks, belly, back, this whole side feels soft and relaxed. I'm going to work with that same leg. So we'll get back to half happy baby. We'll do the other half, I promise. But I want to work with that same leg. So coming back here, knees bent, feet on the floor. Draw the same knee in towards your chest, point it out to the side, and flip the ankle bone over the opposite thigh. So you probably know this as figure 4 stretch. I'm going to just really be as soft with this as I can right now, because I really want to focus on a specific set of muscles in the buttock, the piriformis and some of their best friends, to really see, because those weave right into the pelvic floor and are typically quite tight on a lot of us. If I go into the great big huge sexy stretch, I might miss the piriformis, and that's what I really want to get today. So just relaxing so that your knee moves as far away from the body as possible. Soften in the buttock area. And then let's come into that rocking motion over the sitting bones that we've done so many times in class. So rock forward on the sitting bones and back over the sitting bones. So it's like your sitting bones are rocking chair rungs, and I'm slowly on the porch, rocking forward and back. And you might notice, if we can go back to pelvic floor again, you might notice the sitting bones shifting shape. And as best as you can, now this is my left side, whatever side you're working with, as best as you can, focus on that half of the pelvic floor muscles and feel the gentle tug and pull as you do this motion. Try to make the motion very comfortable. It's not clicking, clunking, twigging, hurting. It's just a nice little fluid motion. You can breathe in the way that makes the most sense to you. Good. And then relax the movement and unwind your legs. Mini Shavasana. Any difference? I'm hoping there's even more fluidity and more softness. For me, on that side of the pelvic floor, I'm finding right now a distinct flush of energy. So I hope you're having something like that. Okay, feet on the floor, knees bent. We're going to draw the other leg in and come into half happy baby on this side. So remember, using the prop might be a really good idea so that you get magically longer arms and you can be more relaxed here. I'd really like the sacrum and all of the buttocks to stay on the floor the same way as they were when I was here. I've just lifted the leg. So having a prop can make that happen. Without a prop, you might find that you need to lift your leg up, and it changes the relationship of the pelvis. And again, breathing, trying to discern what movement, if any, you sense in your sitting bone area. We'll take a couple more breaths, spending this precious time with yourself. And then we can release. You can take a mini Shavasana if you're finding that an interesting kind of insertion at this point. And we'll repeat our figure 4 stretch. So knee comes in, points out to the side, cross the ankle over the opposite thigh. Relax on purpose, letting the bent knee in the air kind of just float away from your body, bringing a sense of ease and softness into the pelvic floor, low belly, low back, and buttock. Keep that with you as you begin the rocking motion. So it's the same motion with the lower back that we did when we were doing the rocking over the sitting bones right at the start. Breathe in a way that makes sense, that feels instinctive to you. And see if you can tune in to how the sitting bones are moving as the balloon inflates and deflates. And then we'll release that leg. Let's bring both feet up off the floor, touch our hands to the knees. Last bit of movement here. Inhale, push the knees gently away from your body, arms straight. Exhale, knees pull in, arms bend a little bit. So now you're really doing a big rocking chair over the sitting bones. And if you feel like you want to move for the last couple breaths here, or maybe you want to just keep the knees falling in towards the chest for a couple breaths, it's personal choice. Just if you can, stay involved with the movements of your pelvic floor. And then it's Shavasana for real time. So you may just stretch your legs out and kind of be au naturel, or there may be some other props that you would like to pull in for your relaxation. So settling to the earth. And feeling the weight of your legs and your arms, back of your head. Settle into gravity. Sense the weight of your bones. Allow your bones to glide down through layers of tissue and muscle as they answer that call from gravity. As your breath gently sweeps in and out through the nose, allow it to move amongst the bones. Just like we were imagining so much today, that balloon imagery. Imagine that three-dimensional balloon is expanding your entire body now on the inhales. And your entire body sinks a bit more deeply to the ground on the exhales. We don't need to instruct the body to move or do anything. It knows exactly what to do. We're just watching that jellyfish type fluidity to the breath, to the bones in general. Notice your jaw, the position of your teeth, the level of tension you might be holding in your tongue muscle. And if you found any softness in the jaw or the tongue muscle, let that cascade down the back of your body through the neck and shoulders, spine. Relaxing deep into the sacral area, the organs of the low belly, and of course the pelvic floor. You may intuitively sense that connection. Relaxing the jaw and throat all the way down to the pelvic floor. And then all the way down the inner legs to the toes. It's all connected. If you have more time to spend in Shavasana this afternoon, please take it. You've worked really hard. But for those of us who have somewhere else maybe to get to, gentle movements, try to stay languid and fluid as we roll over onto our side and make our way to some sort of comfortable seat. And that might mean you go back to your chair. And I would love to share the close of class with you today by chanting Om. When you're ready, inhaling. Namaste, everybody. I'd love to chat. And let me just stop the recording here.